Hey y'all, welcome back to Where Do I Begin, a podcast with your girl Tia. I'm excited to share with you today and just continue to share the things that God is putting on my heart to share as a testament to other people because you are literally looking at a walking, breathing, living, talking miracle. And all glory goes to God, to Jesus, my Lord and Savior. It is not easy to do these types of podcasts. I've had a podcast before where I gave encouraging messages and words and affirmations and different things to help people on their journey of healing. But to really share some of the things that I will be sharing on this podcast, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of boldness to be very vulnerable and transparent and to put it out for the world to see. But I wouldn't have it any other way because the Bible says that we overcome by our testimony. And I know that the things that we go through, they are not just for ourselves. It is not just for our own story, our own history. It is to help somebody else. It is to help to free the captives, and that is the purpose of this podcast, to share parts of my story from a place of healing and wholeness to help set the captives free. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming back this week to see what I'm talking about today. I mentioned last week that I met my sibling in the mall, and I want to tell a little bit more of that story because telling about my birth story, telling about how I entered into the world, that was very raw and vulnerable for me. But it was so healing and refreshing for me to be able to speak it from a place of healing, from a place of wholeness, and a place of forgiveness. And like I said, I was conceived in love. I had a mother that did everything she could to give me the best. Some of the things that she struggled with because of her own traumas and her own experiences and her own generational curses. But I don't want you to despise your story because our story is important, and God uses everything. And I know I mentioned that before, that God uses everything, every piece of our story, every piece of our puzzle, every piece of our book is important. It's necessary to get an expected end because He has an expected end for us. He has plans for us, and He knows the plans that He has for us. And they are plans to prosper us, and they are plans to give us an expected end. And so every single piece, every single period, every comma, every semicolon of our story is purposeful. I shared that I met my sister in the mall. I was 12 years old. It was a month before my 13th birthday. And I happened to go to a slumber party. So, in sharing that my mom did everything that she could to make sure that we had the very best, she made sure that me and my siblings, we went to private school. So I went to private school from kindergarten through eighth grade. And I struggled through several years of that because and up until I got to fifth grade, I was the only black girl in my class. I was the only black person in my class. When I got to fifth grade and there were two other black kids, I was just like, well, bless the Lord. And I'm still very close friends to one of those people today. But it was a culture shock for me. My mom made sure that I was very protected and I lived a very sheltered life. And so there were so many things that I was not subjected to. There were so many environments that was completely foreign to me because my mom was so intentional about making sure that she shielded me from a lot of things that were going on in the outside world. She shielded me from a lot of the ugliness of the world, and she shielded me just from a lot of things that really, she did a really good job of that. And I have to just give her kudos to that. So thank you, Mama. There were also struggles that came with being the only black girl or only black child in a class from kindergarten until fifth grade. So I didn't have a lot of black friends. And I laugh and I tell people that I didn't even know that I was black. I knew I was black, but I was also the girl that was in fourth grade listening to alternative music and watching and wearing Doc Martens and watching Clueless and As If. Like, it was a culture shock for me. So, when I got into sixth grade, there was a girl that was in eighth grade, and she was the prettiest girl. Like she was a black girl. I just looked up to her, and we had still had recess, I think, because I went to my school, went from kindergarten all the way to eighth grade, so it wasn't like junior high or middle school was a separate building or a separate entity. It was all just one building. And so I was good friends with her, and I just really looked up to her. I thought she was like the prettiest thing. She had this pretty chocolate brown skin and this long beautiful hair. And I was just like, she is so gorgeous, she's so pretty, I want to be like her. And she was so cool. Now, she had gotten transferred from public school, so she is a little rough around the edges, okay? Um, but I just thought that she was so, like, it was so different than what I was used to in my school experience and the people that I was used to being around, that I was so intrigued by her. And even though she was a little bit older than me, um, my mom allowed me to kind of be friends with her. And she had a birthday party, and it was a slumber party. And my mom didn't let me go a lot of places. She didn't let me go to a lot of slumber parties and things like that. And as a 2024 mom, I completely understand. But she allowed me to go to this slumber party. So that was already a little bit out of the usual because it just wasn't a frequent occurrence. And she was very particular about who I would be around. And she allowed me to go to this slumber party, and it was a weekend event. So it was from, Friday night, and then the next day we were going to hang out, and then, we went home. So I went to her slumber party and Friday night, and all of her public school friends were there. Now, mind you, I am the youngest girl there. I had never been around a lot of public school kids, and that's no shade to nobody in public school, but this is my story, and I'm telling my experience. But I had never been around that group of kids, and these weren't just like suburban public school kids. These were like public school kids that was from around the way. Okay. And so I was just like, a whole new world. I was in this just like shock of, okay, this is different than what I'm used to. And so I remember I went, and the girls happened to go to the same school that my sister went to. Now, mind you, my mom didn't keep from me the fact that I had siblings. I knew that I had siblings. I knew that my dad had other kids. My mom had told me their names, so I knew their names. And so it wasn't a mystery to me that I had two sisters and a brother. I knew that I did. I just had never met them. And, my mom, it wasn't her responsibility for us to be introduced. And she never took that role because that was my father's responsibility. I knew where my dad lived, so I knew what area, but I didn't know much about the public school system. But they just happened to go to the same school. And so I don't even remember like all of the leading up to that. I don't remember the conversation, but I know I said that I had a sister, and I told them her name. And that's when it came out that they went to the same school as her. Right. So I was like, yeah, well, that's my sister. And I don't think, I know that people didn't know that I existed. In my world, my family knew the story. They knew, the history, but people on that side, on my father's side, him in the community, they didn't know that I existed. There weren't many people that knew about me. And so when I shared those things with those young ladies who I didn't know, I had no idea because I was young, I was naive. I had no idea what was actually happening. I didn't know if they would go back and talk to her. I didn't know the implications that could be attached to that. I didn't know that I could have possibly like opened up a can of worms in my father's household. Like I was sick. I was in sixth grade. I was 12 years old. I had no idea. I was just having conversation. I'm sure I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to feel included. And I knew that I had a sister, and I didn't understand then how much I knew that I was like a secret, but I didn't really understand like the magnitude of it at the time. So, in sharing that, I remember they were really shocked and they were like, what? Like, what? Like, I didn't know that I was given tea. Okay. I was given full tea. And, so they were just like, yeah, I know her. And, they were saying that they knew who she was and all of that. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm her sister. And so we whatever happened throughout the night, I'm sure we were calling people on the phone and talking to people and all of those things that young girls do at a slumber party back in those days. But the next day we got up, and a part of the birthday celebration was to go to the mall. So we went to the mall, and now, mind you, I had never really just been like a mall walker before, because the friends that I went to school with, they didn't go to the mall like that. Like, I went to school with white kids that had money. So if we went to the mall, we were going shopping. We weren't going to just like socialize and walk. So this was my introduction into that world, that era. And so we went to the mall, we were walking around, and these were like cool girls. They were it girls, right? And so they were there, and there was this other group of girls that they went to school with. And so apparently everybody went to the mall at that time. But they were there, and we were just talking and laughing and joking and all of those things. And the next thing I knew, there was this other group of girls that they came up to and they were talking to. And then the girls came back to me and said, oh my gosh, your sister is here in the mall. And I remember feeling like my stomach dropped to my feet. And I was just like, wow, okay, okay. And that's crazy thinking back at it. I've never really sat here and just like relived this moment like this. Um, and so the group of girls that I was with, went to the group of girls that she was with, and they told her. And now, as an adult looking back, I can only imagine, because my sister is a couple years older than me, so I can only imagine how embarrassing that must have been for her in that moment, and how that moment completely changed her entire life. How that moment could have completely shattered her vision of, what family was, what, how she may have viewed our dad. Like, I never really took into account how that moment completely rocked her world, because it was such a world rock for me that, looking back, I just know that that moment probably was just exciting and devastating all at the same time. I couldn't imagine what it would be like for a group of people to be like, you got a sister and she's here in the mall. And you'd be like, what? I ain't got no sister. Who are you talking to? Like, get out of my face. But anyway, so I walked up to her, and I don't know where I got that courage from. I don't know what happened. I don't know where I got that boldness from, because I was a quiet girl. When I was a kid, I wasn't like a fighter. I wasn't an in your face kind of girl. I wasn't like just a bold, go up to anybody, talk to anybody girl. I was friendly, but I had dealt with, just so many insecurities, being the outcast and the minority for so long. Not only, as I told you before in last episode, like in my family, but also feeling like that in school every day for years of my life. So I have no idea where that boldness came from, but I walked up to her and I looked her in her eyes. And when I looked at her, she looked like my dad. My sister looks like my dad. And so I looked her in her eyes and I said, hi, I'm your sister. And she looked back at me and she said, no, you not. And I was just like, yes, I am. And I began to tell her my full name. I told her our dad's name. I told her how old I was. I told her my birthday. I told her what he did for a living. And something in her, like I remember her face just kind of like dropped, and she looked at me and I looked at her, and then we both started crying and we hugged each other. Yeah. And in that moment, both of our lives changed forever. And even as I'm saying, just sharing it, I just I can only imagine what that moment did for her. Whew. I'm not about to be crying on this podcast, okay? And so we exchanged phone numbers, and she was, one thing about her is she was always welcoming of me, even though it was an earth shattering introduction. Um, she was always very welcoming. And later on down the line, she told me like she always wanted a little sister. And so I think there was something exciting about her not being the baby anymore, and that she was a big sister. But also, there was something in her that she knew it was the truth. And she knew it was true because she told me I don't remember if it was months or years later, but when I was 8 years old, I was in the newspaper. There was this festival at in our town called the Ethnic Festival, and there was a parade that they had the morning of the opening morning of the festival, and I had this little outfit on, and I there's a picture that they took of me shaking a clown's hand, and as I was shaking the clown's hand, they got that shot, and that was put in the newspaper. And so it was like on the front page, and they put my name down there, my full name, and I had my dad's last name, and so they put my name and my age down there. And now in this city, nobody had our last name except for us. So it wasn't like it was a common last name like Smith, like I could have been anybody's child. Like it was very evident. And so my sister told me that she was in piano class, I think, and the piano instructor said something to her mom about seeing her daughter or something in the newspaper, and she heard my name. When I told her my name, it rang true for her because she had heard it before, but she just didn't know what the story was behind it. So I went home that day and I told my mom. And I remember I walked into the kitchen and my mom was doing dishes. And I told my mom, I said, I met my sister in the mall. And she looked at me and she was like, really? And she was like, what was that like? And I said, she was really nice. I said, I told her that I was her sister. I told her who my dad was. And we exchanged phone numbers. And my mom looked at me and said, good. And I know that that had to have been a weight that was lifted off of her shoulders in that moment, because I'm sure that it probably grieved her that I was denied the opportunity to have a relationship with my siblings for 12 years. And that might have also been a little bit like, that's what you get. You should have introduced him yourself. That my mama might have felt, a little dig towards my dad. But, you know, it just it was a completely random thing, and that makes me really think of the importance of divine appointments, and how you never know what God is going to do, how God is going to move, and you never know the importance of you being at a certain place in a certain time, because you never know what divine appointment may be meeting you. Had I not went to that slumber party, I would have never met my sister. If I hadn't went to the mall with them, I would not have been in the right place at the right time to meet my sister. And that just really makes me think about even like the story of Joseph in the Bible, about how his whole life was about divine appointments. If he had never been thrown in the well and sold to the Egyptians, he never would have been second in command to Pharaoh. If he was never second in command to Pharaoh, then Pharaoh's wife never would have lied on him and he would have been thrown in prison. If he was never thrown in prison, he never would have been in connection with the cupbearer and interpreted those dreams. If he never interpreted those dreams, he never would have been, promoted to second in command. I know I told the story a little bit out of order, but it just goes to show if that everything was necessary for him to get in position so that he could bring Egypt, so that he could save Egypt, so that he could, be the one to interpret the dream that Pharaoh had, so that he could save them and put in strategy in place for the 7 years of fruitfulness, so that when the 7 years of famine, they would be covered, and that even in the 7 years of famine, that his brothers and his father would come, and they would come before him and not know that it was him, and that so even his provision was already put in place. But had he never been sold, had he never been thrown into the well, had he never been thrown into prison, then these divine appointments never would have happened, and the trajectory of his life never would have happened. The miracles, the amazing work that he did would not have happened. And so there's something to be said about divine appointments. You never know why God is doing what he's doing, why God is sending you to certain places. You never know the importance or the reason where you're supposed to be, why you're supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time for whatever it is that God has set up for you, because there is just something to be said about the intentionality of God. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He knows how he wants to move. He knows what pieces of the puzzle need to go where. He knows the exact timing of the exact meetup. Like, he is so intentional. And so had I not been there, had she not been there, then we would have missed our divine appointment. And there's no telling what opposition that might have been in place to keep us to keep that moment from happening. But how many of y'all know that when God wants something done, he's going to make sure that it comes to pass? And so I'm thankful for divine appointments, because it happened when it was supposed to happen. I remember not long after that, a few weeks after that, my brother and my other sister came and we met. And so from there, I ended up meeting them, and then I started being allowed to go over to their house and go to my brother's basketball games, and be introduced into this whole new world, and that started a whole different era for me, that I'm sure I'll talk about here on this podcast. But I was, introduced to the public schools. I was introduced to, just a different way of life. And um, it filled in some gaps for me, but it also created more. I felt a sense of completeness in a way, but I also felt a sense of incompleteness. Like, I felt out of place still. Like, I just still didn't fit. Even though like this mystery part of the puzzle was finally solved, it still just didn't feel like I just fit, because I just, like, these were strangers to me, right? And I was a stranger to them. And I know it wasn't easy for them to just receive me with welcome arms, open arms, and to receive me in this welcoming just embrace, like, yay, it's our sister, because it literally, my existence spoke to the imperfections of my father. My existence spoke to whatever possible issues may have been going on in his home. My existence was an undeniable representation of a sense of brokenness somewhere. And so over the years, we've all grown to know each other, love each other. We're siblings, so sometimes we get along, sometimes we don't. We have seasons where we're close, we have seasons where we don't really talk, because I think it's normal for us to not talk all the time, because for so many years, we didn't even know who each other were. But I'm just grateful that, I know who they are, they know who I am. We love each other, whether we talk every day or not. I thank God for my siblings. I thank God for their life. And, I'm just grateful for I'm just grateful for God answering prayer. there are places where, I'm sure there's still questions. There may still be some holes here and there, but for the most part, we're family. At the end of the day, you can't deny me, I can't deny you. We family. And so, it's crazy to me because when I hear that story, it sounds like something out of a reality show, but it's my real life. And so, just understanding that, man, had we not been in the right place at the right time, that appointment, that divine appointment would never have happened. And it could have been years before we found each other. It could have been years. Who's to say if we ever would have found each other? Now, where we're from is a small city, so I'm sure that at some point we would have crossed paths. But God is good and He's intentional and He knows what He's doing. And so, just like Joseph, every piece of my puzzle, every piece of my story has been building up to this moment, to this season, to this appointed time, to this calling, this assignment. And I know that, like I said, nowadays it's not uncommon for there to be a lot of babies running around and siblings and all of that. But back in the day, it was not a common thing. And so, if there's anybody out there that just feels misplaced, that feels like they don't belong, that feels like they are resentful for their story and their upbringing and the things that they had to experience, I just want to encourage you today and let you know that every piece of the puzzle is important. Every piece of the story is purposeful, and that there are some very important divine appointments that you have had, that you will have, and that you will come in contact with in the future, that will all unfold and it will all make everything make sense. You might not be able to see it right now because you're in it. You might not be able to see it because you lived it and you experienced it and you're still hurting from it, or you still have questions. But just know that there is importance in divine appointments, and that God uses every single thing for His good, for your good, for His glory. And so, don't despise your story. Don't despise what you've gone through. Um, Approach your family with grace and forgiveness, because you don't know how your existence may have affected other people. You don't know how your story affects other people. And I pray that people give you the same grace, because your truth is your truth. Even if it upsets other people, even if it makes other people uncomfortable, your truth is still your truth. Your story is still your story, and it's very valid. And I don't want you to feel like you have to shrink, because for a lot of years I felt like I had to shrink and hide different parts of my story because I didn't want to offend people, or I didn't want to upset people, because I knew that it was a sore spot for them. But being able to share these things in wholeness and in truth, and with no hard feelings or no unforgiveness in my heart, I understand that the story, it sounds like something off the Shade Room, um, but it's molded me to who I am. And in some way, shape, or form, it's molded them into who they are as well. And so, know that what you're going through, it's molding you as well. So don't despise divine appointments. Whatever season that you just came out of, whatever season you might be in, whatever season you might be entering into, just know that all things work together for your good, and for those that are called according to His purpose, for those that love the Lord, for those that are in alignment with His will. And if you are any of those things, then even the bad parts of your story are purposeful. Yeah, that's it.